Hello, and welcome to the DoneJS contributors meeting. Today is Friday, September 8th, 2017. My name is Jason, and everyone's going to introduce themselves and let's say what our favorite book is. So I'll start. So I'm Jason, just said that. And my favorite book is The Phantom Toll Booth. I don't know if anyone else has read that, but that's my favorite book. Brad, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Jason. Hi, I'm Brad from the Toby core open source team. My favorite book, I'll actually split this between fiction and non. Favorite fiction is Pattern Recognition by William Gibson, and favorite nonfiction is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
I like it. John?
Hey, I'm John from Chicago, and my favorite book is, there's a lot. It's hard to say just one, but I'll go with Ishmael by Daniel Quinn.
Cool.
Hey, I'm Justin. My favorite book is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is the Shrike, and it will haunt your nightmares if you read the book.
That looks sick.
I tell you, I actually read that after you told us about it last year. I think you talked about it. It was good. I started reading the second one, not as good.
Oh, really? The second one's the best, the better one, most people think. Wow.
I like the first one.
Wait, the first 1 and 2, Hyperion, the Fall of Hyperion? Or you're talking about Edminion? Because there's really 4 books.
No, yeah, Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion. That's what I'm talking about.
You didn't like the Fall?
No, I actually didn't finish it, so maybe it got better. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Did you get to the surprise?
I think so. We'll have to talk about it later. Yeah. All right. Hi, I'm Kevin. For my favorite book, I'm going to go with the book that was closest to me, which is the Butter Battle book, which I actually read to my kid, and it's not a very good story for kids. But anyway, that one. And then right now I'm reading a book called Dreamland, which is about the opiate epidemic in America, and that's pretty good. I think it's interesting.
Very diverse selection on your behalf.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we're going to go through our status for this past week and what we'll be working on next week. And we'll do demos. Well, we can mix this in with demos too. So I'll go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen. And cool. Send to everyone. Okay, cool. So this week I published the community update blog post. If you haven't seen these before, I try and outline the stuff that we've released in the past month. So like this month, DoneJS 3.10 was our big release, and then Steel had a bunch of updates too. So you can find links to all of the docs and release notes and that sort of thing. We had a couple of people present at conferences this past month, so I highlighted their talks and some blog posts that we published too. And then I love to call out everyone who contributes to our projects. We wouldn't be able to do it without the contributors and that are outside of the core team too. And then what's next for us? So got some links to some meetups that we've set up. Which is actually, I was going to highlight the LA one. It's going to be October 17th. If you're in the LA area, love to see you come out. We're going to go through one of the DoneJS guides and build a recursive file navigator widget, which is pretty cool. And we're looking for a host. So if you're in the LA area, you have a hookup for a venue that would want to host us, please give me a shout out in the forums or on Gitter, what have you. So yeah, and then we linked to some of the stuff that we're currently working on. Yesterday, I released a new patch of DocumentJS that fixes using the CLI globally. So that's fixed. And then I just added some docs to steeljs.com. On the configuration page, we have some docs for how plugins work now. We had mentioned it in the migrating notes, but we didn't have a single resource for those docs. So I worked on those things, and then We're going to have a community survey. We've talked about it a little bit in previous streams. So I started working on that this week, and we should have something next week to start collecting emails, so we can hear your feedback and hear what you kind of what you like and don't like about our tools, and kind of where you would like to see us put our focus. So next week I'm going to be focused on that community survey. Okay, cool. Let me stop screen sharing. Cool. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. So this week I worked on self-referential templates, which I can give a short demo on. Do you want me to do that now or later, Jason?
Yeah, let's do our demos now.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen then. All right, so I just made a quick test for this to show like kind of what it does. So we can now use this asterisk self to go back and refer to the entire template. So if we have a defined map here with a few children in it, so we've got a main grandpa worm and we've got two children, we're going to basically set the scope using this magic tag with as child. Notice that we have to use this dot slash. That's so that it doesn't walk up the tree and basically keep recursing. Like it would get down to my doom and then look for the next child. It would find child on my doom again and keep doing that. So if we didn't have that, we would have to have like child false here. I think so. Okay, and so what we get whenever we render this to a view, which I'm just console logging here, sorry, it's taking a bit long for some reason. All right, so we get this document fragment that successfully goes through and recurses like using that, using the template itself. So we get all three spans. And the documentation for that will be under can stash. Under the key operators, there will be, I don't think it's published yet, but there will be this asterisk self down here, which will give you more details on how it works.
Cool.
And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks for presenting.
Yep.
Who'd like to go next?
What's up, Julian?
Oh yeah, hey Julian.
Hey everybody.
Hey, we're just going through status right now, and we introduced ourselves with our favorite book. If you want to think about that before you share your status. Does someone else want to?
I never read a book.
Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next.
Cool.
So this week I planned a few meetups. If anybody's in the LA, Silicon Valley, or Boston area, there are. We're going to start doing the same meetups that Chicago's been doing. So a great opportunity to see how to build some widgets. The first one's going to be a file navigation widget, which is fun. And then I also worked on the first of a blog series that I'm doing, which is all about how we kind of rewrote CanJS from 3.0 to make our code base to allow it to evolve while still being rather stable. I'll talk a little bit about it here. So it's really two parts. The first part is why we chose to do all of this and how we're prioritizing code stability highly now in CanJS. And then the second article is about how we manage code across many independent repositories and the benefits of it. In short, the big benefit is that is really going to be for users is going to be the migration story. People should be able to use like a canned route 4.0 with old canned components. So if we're releasing new features, they should be able to get new features or even breaking changes of one part of the framework, but not have to change everything. It'll also allow us for something, canned route's kind of an exception because it's inherently stateful, but things like canned component, if we have a canned component 4.0 and a canned component 3.0, there's no real reason you can't use a 3.0 alongside a 4.0. So that's the big thing, is we want it so that, you know, the upgrade between 2.3 and 3.0 looks really big, but in reality, there's just a bunch of there's a few little tiny changes, but there's so many new features, so many bug fixes. The breaking changes look like the real hurdle of upgrading, but that won't really, hopefully, be a problem going forward because we split everything into so many, 66 repositories and counting and kind of published online. So the way we do it is there's a few different tools. One is we use the DoneJS plugin generator, which just allows us to scaffold a NPM-based project that has builds integrated, it works with Travis out of the box, has testing harnesses, all of that stuff just ready to go. The next is we use CanJS's, there's still a CanJS repository, which mostly acts as an integration test. We'll load every single sub-project and build them all and test them all together, which makes sure, and in every single browser, which makes sure there's a single version of CanJS confirmed to work with everything. This is what is actually listed here on CanJS's webpage. If you go to the API docs, there's this can package section that lists every single package. Well, it looks like a few of them are missing, which we should add. But it adds like all of the core collection. Looks like it's needs a few more things in the infrastructure collection. So you could hard code your CanJS versions. So if you really want CanJS 3.10, CanJS 3.10 is tested with these versions. So you can always upgrade to releases of CanJS, tested integrated releases of CanJS by upgrading your packages to the versions that match here. We probably need to make something for users at some point that allow this, like a can upgrade, that you can say, hey, upgrade to Can 3.10, and what it really does is just writes these things out. The next thing is we use Greenkeeper to manage downstream dependencies, or actually we call them upstream packages. So if I release a can util that breaks can component, I should know about it with Greenkeeper. It'll email me. And then really, Kevin should talk more about Landscaper, but with 60 different repositories, we're wanting to make changes across a lot of repositories. It can be quite annoying to clone them all, check out the master, make a release, or submit a pull request for all of those, and then making a request, release a whole other thing. But Landscaper is a command line tool that lets you run a code mod against a bunch of different repositories. And a code mod is essentially something that just changes some part of the code. In this case here, it's changing the license file to have a different copyright year. So we can write a little code mod like this, even upload it as a gist, and then just use Landscaper to submit pull requests against all 60 repositories. And then finally, we use ZenHub for all issues, or to kind of manage issues across multiple projects. ZenHub's pretty nice for this. The two things that I find it most, well, three things I find it most valuable for is, one is you can do epics, which are issues of issues. And the next thing is there can be time pointed, and it can roll up other epics within an epic and also time point them. So you can see your status, which is really nice. And then the final thing is there's boards, which these do at the scale we're running DoneJS, run a little bit more slowly. But these allow you to see every single issue and triage it over maybe it's broken. Not a great ad for them right now. Also, I am using a different computer because my computer fried, so maybe that might be part of the problem. This allows us to triage issues over all of our projects, which is really nice. So that's it for me and my status. Next week, I'm planning on finishing the blog post series, which is going to talk more about some of the architectural changes we did in CanJS, specifically how we are trying to remove side effects from as much as possible and isolate the modules that have side effects, or create state, and then also reharden our stateful packages to make sure that, like, if people load 2 stateful packages, something like what would be an example, like can view callbacks, which it can only really be 1. People know about it. There's problems there. How we integrate with can reflect, can symbol to work with other libraries, and then also one probably just using about code mods. Again, talking about how to use code mods to help people transition to new APIs. So speaking of code mods, I see. Oh, Bianca sent me. I thought I saw her in here for a second, but she made it as a pull request. Just want to bring it full circle. One other thing that takes us a lot of time that we just added some code for was making a release note script that can go and grab every other sub-project that we do and make the combined release notes for CanJS. So this code is here. If anybody's interested, they can find it. I'll probably provide more information about that in the future. So that is it for me.
Cool. Thanks, Justin. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. So this week we published CanJS 3.10.1. The big thing is a bunch of new dev warnings that I'll show off here in my demo. And then there was one critical fix for a bug in CanView Live if you were using each inside of an if and within a batch changed the items in your list and also toggled whatever your if statement was. Crazy bug that was throwing an error in certain cases that we fixed. Then today we're actually going to release a 3.10.2 for another critical issue that we found if you're using getters and last set val. That's not working with Stash right now, but that'll be fixed and out today. Next week, a lot of people are working on 3.11.0, which has a bunch of new features you can check out. There's a link to that epic in the forum post if you want to take a look at that. And then other than that, I'm going to be working on writing up proposals for a bunch of potential new CanJS features in preparation for the survey that we've talked about a little bit. Cool. So my demo. Let me demo all these fancy new dev warnings we've got. All right, everybody see my screen? Good?
Yep. If you wouldn't mind bumping up the text size for. Thanks.
Cool. All right, so I've got 2 empty JS bins. One that has can 3.10, which does not have the warnings, and then one with the latest, that's 3.10.1, that has a bunch of new warnings. All right, so the first warning that we created is if you have some code like this, where you've got a property that is just using a getter, and you try to set that property. So if we run this, nothing's going to happen. This setting this property doesn't actually do anything. It's only going to get its value from this getter, whatever this getter returns. So that's confusing sometimes. In the latest version, if you run this, you get this nice warning that says set value for property greeting on VM, which is what I've titled my my define map, and it's saying setting this property is ignored as its definition has a 0 argument getter and no setter. So that's different than if you used let's set val, then it's not going to give you that warning because you can actually use the last set value there and it would actually work correctly. So if you have this, it doesn't warn. Otherwise, if you're just using a getter with no arguments, you get this nice warning. Cool. All right. The next one is if you have a define map and you set the default value to be an object, you now get a warning that says you shouldn't do that. It says you're setting it to an object. This is going to be shared by all instances of the define map. You should use a function that returns the object instead.
We've needed that one for like 3 years since DoneJS 2.2.
Yeah, it's a problem that people run into all the time where they don't realize this thing is going to be shared. If you're using this as the view model of a component, you have 2 different components. They're sharing that same object. So yeah, that's a problem. All right. The next warning we've got is, I'm just going to not show the old one. In the old version, there's no warnings for any of these. All right. So in this case, if you're using a default value and you're setting it to a constructor function. So in this case, I'm setting it to the define map constructor function. It gives you this warning that says, the value for options is set to a constructor. Did you mean capital value instead? So that you know you should be using the capital V value, and that's working fine.
Hey, Kevin, does can reflect make all of this a lot nicer now?
Yes, so can reflect made this very easy because we can just say can reflect is constructor of whatever this thing is, or is constructor like. I don't remember what the and we can give that warning very easily. All right. I think I am missing one, but I think the same warning happens if you use, yeah, cool. So definition for options on VM, use a constructor for type. Did you mean type with a capital T? So if we do that, no more warning. So this is kind of telling people they should be using the capitals for all of these things that are constructors. All right, and the last one is the opposite. We actually took a warning away. So here's some code. This is actually a problem that came from a client app, and they get like 20 warnings every time they start their app that'll say this. You have 2 routes registered with matching keys. So they want their routes to work whether or not they have a trailing slash. In most cases, if you have 2 routes that use the same keys, or the same keys in your route, then that's not going to work correctly because this top version is always going to be the route that wins if you set the page property. But in this case, they want this to work. They want the user, if the user types a trailing slash at the end, they want it to work the same way as if they don't. So what we did is we basically kind of special case this. If you have 2 routes that match exactly, except for one of them has a trailing slash at the end, then you no longer get that annoying warning that is warning you of something that you're doing intentionally. So, cool. That's it. Those are all of our fancy new dev warnings. Hopefully they help.
Awesome. Do we have one on you called a getter on a unbound async getter?
No, I don't think we do.
That one might be a good one. I see that a lot.
Yeah, that does throw an error. Let me see what that looks like.
You're not sharing your screen, so we're just going to look at the wonder or repulsion on your face when you discover what we do.
I can share my screen, but so you're saying if you're using an async getter like this, so let's see.
Yeah, you just
do this.
Or don't even call resolve. Yeah, you don't need to call. You can just return hello world. It's fine. Just whatever that. Yeah. I mean, it works.
That works
right?
okay.
As long as you handle, there is no resolve, which is that throws an error, which it should.
Don't do that, then yeah, that throws an error. But if you did, you know,
then it works. Yeah, this is always one of those cases that like I'm not sure whether throwing an error or giving a warning or what we should do. It's kind of a
yeah, I think in this case, like it is an error, right? I don't know. I feel like this one's a little bit different than the other cases that we've handled because there's not really an obvious thing that the user should be doing instead. If they forget to bind on that thing, it's most likely that it's a test that you're writing. That's pretty much when people forget to bind on async headers like this. So it would be kind of hard to instruct the user what they should be doing, I think.
okay.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. Brad and Julian, do either of you want to have anything to demo?
Yes, I would like to go next. That's all right. Just a quick update for the week. One thing we've been doing across the board in CanJS packages this week is removing anything that is depending on a pre-release library. So any place where we have a pre-release dep, it is moving up to the next stable release as a dependency. Some but not all of the packages in CanJS have this released as a new release, but all of them that have one is at very least merged into master. So anytime we make a release on anything, it will go in as well. All right, so the rest of the stuff I've been doing. So Kevin actually did demo some of my work.
Yeah, I should have said all of those warnings. I had very little to do with actually writing the code. Mostly Brad and Bianca worked on that stuff. So.
Right.
Sorry to not actually.
Half of my status update right there is I made some warnings there. So there's a couple doc updates. So CanView model now officially takes an element, a string that will be treated as a selector or an array like a jQuery result from selecting on the DOM. And we've actually had that functionality in for a while now, but it's now documented, so it's official. The other thing is that the EQ stash helper is now documented. It's the same thing as is, it's just an alias. We wanted to make sure that people knew how that works. This morning, we just put out a release of can stash bindings, which upgrades to, depending on can stash 371. And that actually allows you to use properties that have dots in the name now with bracket expressions in your, both in stash lookups and in any bindings. So if you need to do that in your view model for some reason, it's now totally supported. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is cyclic dependencies. So we've actually had a problem with having circular dependencies in our 3.0 can stuff, and it's one of the unfortunate side effects of trying to move out to using individual packages for everything, because sometimes then we had things depending on other things in like a mutual way, which was fine if it's all in one package, but it becomes kind of a nightmare when you try to do upgrades on things. So I've been doing a little research into what's available out there to look at circular dependencies in a Node NPM project like CanJS. And it turns out that like half the stuff out there is based around Webpack. So ignoring that, but I did find a couple things, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about what I was finding out. So let's see. Let's start with this out here. So there's a couple packages I've been working with that I've been able to actually work correctly on this one. So there is a package called Madge. And Madge is interesting because it actually does it does everything by actually reading the text of the files using a library called Precincts, and looks for any requires and then uses that to build its dependency graph. So you can actually make like an entire like dependency graph as an image with Maj, but if you do it with CanJS, it becomes like 100,000 pixels wide, and that's not really all that useful. But it is actually good for finding circular dependencies. Like we have actually one in CanZone. So it's actually kept within the package, so that's not too terrible. Wouldn't cause us problems when we try to upgrade. But it's actually a thing that you can see that it's detecting. Not everything was detected by all the packages I was testing, so I won't be talking about ones that don't. This is a little bit slow for the reasons that I was talking about, because it actually has to scan files. A different way that we might do this is to actually use this package called NoCycle. So NoCycle actually hooks into the node require and module loading functionality. So pretty much all we have to do is, and this is the difference between this, is that Maj is actually just reading the text of the JavaScript files we were passing in. NoCycle is actually allowing them to be loaded into memory as modules as normal, but then reads off their dependencies and sees if it can find cycles in that. So we need a little boilerplate here for CanJS, just so that the things that require certain global elements to be there are there. So things like the HTML element, XML HTTP requests, and the jQuery objects all need to be there before we actually start loading all of our dependent libraries. You can actually see that this is really quick. Yeah. So if we run node NoCycle.js, in about 2 seconds, it found not only the zone issue, but also an extra one that I'd reverted to, or actually a cycle that I put in that went between our different node module folders, that went between observation and stash key. That was a circular dependency that we used to have that was actually very annoying, and that's why we have can stash key now, is so that we can avoid it. You can see from here, yeah, I just added that in here for the purposes of demonstration. So it seems like as long as we can get a similar script out like the NoCycle one here for CanJS, and write something similar for individual libraries, we can be fairly certain that we'll catch circular dependencies as they crop up using pre-install hooks.
So could we put that script in like an ESLint rule and have it run with our lint?
I think so. I actually haven't really investigated how you can add like arbitrary commands into ESLint. But if we move to that from JSHint and that's supported, I think it should work just fine.
I mean, you could just make it part of the tests. It doesn't have to be part of that. It just has to be part of the test.
Yeah, it could just be a part of our JSHint npm script or whatever.
Or just npm. When we always run npm run test, so just do that. Just make it npm run test runs JSHint, and then it could also run, and it also kicks off testy, and then you would just make it also kick off this.
Yeah. One thing about NoCycles that currently exists is that you have to actually run it from an actual file. Like you can't just use node-e from the command line, which would be nice. I think it would actually be pretty easy to fix it so that you could run it from the command line and just use like the process environment for the current directory, because that's the only reason why it's needed, is because it's reading off its own file's directory name.
One other just diabolical way of doing this, or like interesting way, would just be, because we have to load Steal anyways, like we could just, Steal has all the same information because it knows all of the packages and knows what their dependencies are. We could just have something like, if you, instead of loading Steal QUnit, you just load Steal, you know, extra unit, and then that includes a test that always checks for cycles anyways. And then we just make, instead of loading Steal QUnit everywhere, we just load this thing, and then every single test, no matter what, is always checking for that. There's other ways we could do it that way too, through Steal. Also, couldn't this just be done statically? I'm surprised there's not a static version of this. I'm surprised it makes you require things. You know what I mean? That it just doesn't check your package.jsons and figure it out from that.
Yeah, I was surprised that that wasn't there, but I think that they were the people who made these were more interested in finding things at the individual module level rather than at the library level.
At the package level, yeah.
Yeah, because you could have a cyclic dependency in your package JSON, but if you don't actually require the file that causes that, it wouldn't actually be a problem.
Yes, right? But then why do you have it as a package dependency?
Maybe you're using another module from that package, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe. I guess I would say in our circumstances, package is probably enough. But,
yeah. Cool. So Brad, is NoScycle your recommendation because it's a lot faster?
It is. Yeah. So I think that we should go with that and figure out a way to make it zero config whenever you add files, just to make sure we catch everything. You know, we'll just have a discussion soon about how to integrate it best and what other things we might need to do. Like, I'd especially like to make sure it gets like dev dependencies and test files. So probably the best thing to do would be to like load the test battery from after doing a NoScycle detect. And yeah, that's probably the best way to go. Yeah.
My biggest concern with it is that it's not statically not it's not doing static analysis, right? That it has to, you have to set up this virtual DOM and things like that.
Well, that's only for CanJS.
Yeah, but that would be for every project that touches the DOM, like stash and components, and all of those would need the same thing, presumably.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we could go with a different solution like Madge that doesn't actually load modules, but you know, there's a speed cost for that.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Good work.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah. Julian, did you want to share your status? And if you have anything to demo, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, of course. First of all, my book.
All right. We got a book plug finally.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's a version. It's not never read.
Never read it.
No, too big. I don't read that. So yeah, my only book I have. Yeah, status. This week I worked on can EGS. So there was a bug or an issue on Steel that somebody tried to load can EGS with our new Steel or Steel 1.0 or 1.3. So that's not working or was not working. And yeah, I fixed that can EGS. So now you can load your EGS files with Steel. And you can also make a build with your files. So it's now fully supported with Steel. That's the only thing I did this week. And next week, I want to integrate Steel Service Worker into Steel directly. So you can config your Steel build script that automatically creates a service worker for you and all the stuff. So, but I have to do something with Steel Bundler first because yeah, that's needed for chaining our promises. So that's first, and after that I will integrate Steel Service Worker into Steel directly. That's my status.
Cool. That's exciting. Okay. I think that's it for statuses and demos. Justin, I think you were the only one who posted topics, so you want to get us started?
Sure. So we've been talking about deprecating as. There's a whole sweeping set of changes that I really should, I'll just kind of talk through and something else. So we were talking about being able to set the specific variables. Conversation got started, and originally it was going to be with like, you know, you could do person.name first as first was a suggestion. And then I thought, well, it's going to be really weird if you want both a first and a last, because then you would enforce this kind of nesting. And also, not only would you enforce this kind of nesting, there's like DOM nodes that actually would need to get created here. And then also, two different contexts really need to be added to the scope for something like this. So I thought, well, and as is not really a standard handlebars thing anyway, so I thought, okay, well, let's just do something like this. First as that, and last equals person dot last. So you could do something like this with web. And, you know, this is then the discussion, of course, changed to each, and then I was like, okay, well, to be consistent, let's do each item, instead of each item as item, which arguably does read nicer, but to be consistent with something like this, I propose, okay, well, then let's do if I wanted each, let's do people, just so it's clear. Person as it would be the value, and you could do the number as the index. So value and index would be kind of keywords, and then you could do something like person num, which would be 0, is, and you could do person.name. Now, Kevin and I talked about this because Kevin had other suggestions, which he can defend when he chooses to. But after I'm done talking, talking with him, the other thing that I wanted to address was like index and arguments and blah 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 blah, and also we had a kind of a wide-ranging discussion, which then also led into template variables, like import, can import value, I can import from, let's just say I wanted some like helper functions, right? I just wanted some like date helpers too. And then right now you do like, you know, date helpers. And then you can use those date helpers as date helpers. So I think we can all agree that we hate this and this, right? And it would be nice to get rid of that. So, you know, and we also, like, you know, John just was showing, we have self now. So, to clean up a lot of this stuff, what I proposed, or I'm kind of proposing, I mean, I think some of this is split across multiple issues, is two key variables, or like two variables that you would use instead of all this stuff. One is scope, and the other is view. The scope would be your normal scope object, right? Like that actually exists, and you could get that. But then you could also read values on the scope, those kind of special values like index and arguments and things like that, by doing index and, you know, scope dot, like we'd also supply value no matter what. That's kind of in some ways an alias to this anyways, but there would be also scope dot key, and there would be scope dot arguments. Well, this is like your current scope, right? And then, so that would replace a lot of this kind of stuff, right? And then, so essentially helpers, can I scroll back? Helpers like this, you'd basically be reading, hey, what the scope's value and index is going to be, those kind of special index and values, those kind of hidden index and values that you would have to know about? Well, those are there still as scope.value, but now we can alias them. So the other thing then is your view, and this would really be your template. This would what this would do is then if you wanted to render your own template, you could do this. You just say, hey, view. View becomes a special keyword, like that refers to your actual view, your template. But what we would also have on it is then your view variables could be put and attached to the view. So instead of doing can import like this from date helpers to date helpers, you would do view date helpers. And then we would basically set the date helpers, and then you could use it, like this. Essentially, there's like, view becomes a place where you can access the actual renderer, and then there's date help. You can add other properties and things like that, and you can read properties from it too. So we also talked about the idea that the view, because part of the view gets the templates passed to it. So if I'm calling like of my component, we have new can templates. And this already, the content and these so, let's just say I just wanted it to render ABC. These templates are part of the view. So in some ways this is like the option scope in some ways, but or we call it like the. But these would be available too. So if you wanted to render it instead of using slots even, you could actually access that programmatically through Stash by doing view templates.abc. And if you wanted to render that, just like with Stash, you could, or you could use the current slots to render it. But those would be available. Presumably, we could also make inline partials available as well. So if you had, inline partial definition, what these could be actually, this is basically sugar for adding a, view partials my partial. And then you could actually pass that if you wanted, even to a component. You just gotta make sure you're doing the currently, which is terrible, but you've got to do the you've got to use the @ but you could pass that if you wanted as an argument, and maybe, just maybe, you could even do it as a template. So this gets on the view model, but if you wanted to pass it to really its view, you could do something like can template name. I want it called new partial. I want it from the scope, so I would write. Anyways, this is a way I thought of cleaning things up, making it, giving users in some ways less things to know about. Okay, they need to know there's this view special keyword, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. About to curse. A whole bunch of stuff you can do on it, right? And there's like different properties and things relate to that, like partials and whatnot relate to that. And then there's your scope, and then sure, there's these special things that you can read on the scope. And I thought this, and then we're removing this kind of syntax, which I think is nice.
Sorry, Justin. Sorry if I missed the point. So you want to replace the star with view, right?
I want to. Well, yeah. So view would be. I want to replace a few things with view. View would basically be a reference to the actual renderer, the template, if you will. And these are template variables. So the view would just contain those template variables. It's really, the way to actually think about it is like, this could be where the view, there is actually a view helper scope. So this is a reference to like a bunch of things related to the template, not so much related to the actual like scope, which is a different entity. Maybe they could be combined.
So, but view is still the reference scope, or is the view your view model that is in your renderer? Because the star actual is a reference scope. That's not your view model of your renderer, right? It's a
It is not. It's a different. Yeah, it's a different scope that's kind of attached to the view.
After that, view is still a reference scope, or is view the scope of your renderer after you making your changes?
It's the references scope. Well, okay, so maybe this is part of it. Is like maybe it should just be even scope.refs here or scope.view, but I thought it was like a little weird to. Okay, you're bringing up a good point, which is surprisingly technical. Not that you are, I'm surprised in your technical ability, but that it's like, it's that, well, I guess it's like there's like looking at it from the user's point of view. You're totally right in that references scope, like the scope that, you know, if I do ABC or like pound refs or ref or something like that. What that's really, there is every template, when a template is rendered, the scope, somewhere up the scope, there's a references scope object added. And anything with star automatically gets added there. Right? It's like we need a way to know what we are adding to the references scope. We need some kind of syntactic trigger to know, like, hey, we should not be adding, where was an example of that? Date helpers. We should not be looking for a view property on the current scope, like the top of the scope, which you could have a view property or something like that, but you shouldn't. This is a way of us like automatically knowing, like, we are supposed to be looking on kind of the references scope. Now, maybe if we wanted to be more explicit and actually in line with how CanJS really works, is maybe we could do scope.refs or something, and that would automatically look up the references scope, and then you would do stuff like that. And then presumably we'd also, on the scope, there would also, we would just make it so the references scope had access to the actual renderer. But I thought that this would just be like a lot for people to go through. So in some ways I wanted like the idea of that references scope, the things that like exist for that template as a whole, like the renderer itself, any partials that are created, any you know, any templates that were passed to it. In some ways, there's like another keyword that just gives you access to all of those, where in reality, yes, they're all inside the scope. That's, everything kind of has to work that way. But I just thought to give people some other keyword towards to it so that they didn't really have to go through this. Maybe that was.
But that means that you have words that are reserved for,
yes,
particular idea. So scope and view doesn't, or you don't have, you don't have to have a
yeah, you can't have a view property unless you do something like /view to read it. You would have to be made context sensitive. Yeah, that's definitely a concern. I think view is larger concern. I don't think scope is a concern. I think scope is less of a concern, right? My guess is that hopefully people don't have scope too often in their apps. It's kind of a weird app that you would have. That's such a meta conceptual thing. But, you know, there's JavaScript has arguments as a keyword, and this is a keyword, and keywords are common in languages. And you could always do, if you wanted to get, you could always just go like that if you really wanted Vue to be probably. I'd probably make it so if you did this, Vue was going to be looked up as context. Normal in the scope, Vue property in the scope. So we have a way like out. People need it for those special properties.
I think especially Vue would be too common for us to make that change. I feel like there's too much opportunity for that to conflict with existing code that we wouldn't want to do that.
Okay.
I actually think it would be better to, like, if we want to add scope or view or whatever, like keep the percentage prefix.
No, I really don't want to do that. Yeah, I'm really against the percentage stuff. It looks weird. It's further away from JavaScript's idioms that there's this, you can have variables that have written up differently. You don't do that in JavaScript. I don't know if there's many other languages that you even do that for. I would much prefer just to have like a very small subset of reserved words than keep with this percentage thing.
Is there any reason, or would we be able to have something like can import, so we can like import from and import like the scope or view and then assign it to a variable that we can use in our template? So if you're fine with having scope and view be the terms that you use in your template, then you can import it as that, or you can import it as whatever you want. Because I think that making that very clear where that is coming from is valuable.
Yeah, I guess I don't agree. I think it's fine to have a few, like, where does this come from in JavaScript, right? Or where does arguments come from? It just exists. I think some amount of that is perfectly okay to just say like, hey, there's these two, like, what we're going from is, instead of like, a huge wide variety of like just magic things that appear, we're going to like one or two of them. And to me, like, just fine. I mean, I feel like it's fine to just even go to scope, and then fine, it's just scope.refs and then scope.view and scope.partial, scope.blah, blah, 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 blah. That's totally fine. I'm fine with that too. Just place, we'd have scope.references for like references scope. So it's kind of just nastier, right? Because you're having to do, you're having to do this instead of just like view. But I mean, in some ways that's a lot better, because I don't know, like, people will understand the references. In some ways it's nice, in some ways it's just like onerous because there's a lot you have to write here. But especially if you've got date helpers as a, like, you're having to call view date helpers, you're having to write scope date helpers, pretty date, ABC. That's kind of a mouthful compared to like view date helpers, but I don't care enough. Like, I just want to get rid of these kind of things.
So I agree. I think the main point is that you read your template, and what you are reading is what you are getting. So I think the new binding syntax is the first step for that, and I think it's okay to have some reserved words for that. And because if you read value to star date helper, it has no meaning for newcomers or people that see CanJS. So I think it's good to read template, and you are guessing what's done there. But yeah, I think view is a common word, right? So I agree with.
Yeah, I'm open to other suggestions there.
I think we could also. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we could also, we could provide warnings and stuff saying that you're overriding one of our, or you're trying to set one of our reserved keywords or whatever. If somebody has a view property on their view model or whatever.
They're not only do they have a view property, they're actively using it in the template, or
Right.
making use of it. Right? I can see people having a view property that doesn't necessarily actually put into the view.
So yeah, the other thing I think is debugging this as easy as possible is really another key. Because the problem that I had with your each suggestion, if you scroll up to the top, is that you have to know that value and index are those keywords that only exist within like the each magic tag. I personally will forget those, but I think if we make debugging that easy, then that's not that big of a deal. I think it.
What do you mean by debugging? Like if they wrote the wrong thing?
Yeah. So if you used whatever instead of value, you used I don't know, prop or something. I don't know what you would use. Yeah, something like that. We have the debugger.
Well, debugging, I think we just warn like, hey, use item. What are you doing? That doesn't use value or index.
How would okay, so then the other thing we talked about is if you're using an each over an object, so then you would have value and key. Is that so we would detect what your people is and warn at runtime when you're doing that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy to do.
Okay.
At the moment, because we passed the actual expression tree to helpers now. So, like value, the most complex thing is what we really want eventually, especially for people want to start doing stuff like this too, is we need to be able to say like, hey, helpers, do not get an expression, but don't actually try to read value. There's no reason to try to read a value and index in the scope because that's what it would naturally try to do. But we can make it so that you can either turn that off, or it really doesn't matter if it tries to look up index or value because we're going to get the expression tree and just look up value and index.
So would you also be able to do something like first equals value dot first?
First equals.
So if you just wanted like the first property off of the person object. You want me to share my screen?
Yeah. You mean first like value dot first equals person? Yeah, we could probably make that work. Yeah.
And then if value doesn't have a first property, or I don't know. I just think we end up in this parsing hole where we're adding all kinds
parsing isn't. What's the problem with parsing? Because parse this, no problem.
Yeah, I just mean like we end up with these lots of different edge cases for these warnings that we need to provide.
Yeah. Oh, I get what you're saying is because they wrote like ABC dot first or something. You're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just make it value and index at first. Just like that's it, right? And if it doesn't explicitly equal value or index, throw up on people in polite ways you can. Anyways, okay, so I guess what I don't think that the view thing is at all important to me here. So like I'm totally fine just like having things on scope and having like a refs, or we can just do vars or something. Right? If you want something like that. Like these are variables. And I think to me that's totally fine. And then just everything else, like all of the templates, it would be scope.templates. Those will all be just kind of special things that you would have access to. Really what I would love to do in a 4.0 is get rid of the option scope. Because really that should be the template, that references scope references scope is essentially like, here's things for this rendering of the template that are specific to the rendering of the template. That's where like helpers, tags, all of that stuff should really be in that scope thing. And I'm fine having like, you know, that be like, there's actually a reference, like there's some kind of, there's some kind of way to get to that one context, which is really like the template context or the options context. And then everything else is just like a special, you know, vars could just be destructured to like scope dot like template context dot vars, template context dot partials, template context dot templates, you know, but we just have special, you know, on your scope, these things are kind of aliases right to that special context. I think that's the way I would like to use it. But these would all, by the way, these would all be keywords. These would still be keywords on scope, because presumably what you're still going to be able to do if you wanted is do scope dot like foo, which is the equivalent of doing foo, but these things, if you do this, it's just going to look up foo in the kind of context the way it normally does. If you do scope.foo like this, it's going to instead, you know, run it, see if any of these things are the special, like vars, templates, blah, 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 which I think is fine. It's like essentially all those keywords get shifted to only if you're using this syntax, if that makes sense. Anywho. Cool. So I'll probably put together a proposal for this, like kind of a single combined proposal, which will just be one whole thing. But yeah, just showing people at training yesterday, you know, this kind of stuff, or last week, and this kind of stuff. It's just like, it's just gross. It's just weird, right? It's just so much better, I think, to just give them like, hey, there's this scope thing, and there's a bunch of stuff on there. Go look what that has for you. One place.
So personally, I like the percentage index and percentage argument, but it's in PHP you have some template language that uses @ symbols for stuff into for each loop or something like that. They use that. So I think in PHP it's a common.
PHP has more variable type identifiers.
No, it's a template language for PHP. So if you
I guess just like JavaScript doesn't have anything like this.
There's a for each loop for template or a section, and then you have that @ index, @ iteration, @ first, @ last, @ show, @ total.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's exactly where, because remember, these were ats originally, right? That's the handlebars, as it uses ats. But, or maybe that's even part of mustache spec. But again, I think the long arc of our use of handlebars has been to actually get it closer to JavaScript, and I think people appreciate that, generally speaking.
Yeah, maybe.
So I have a crazy, slightly related thing we could talk about if we have time. I don't know how much time we got, Jason.
Yeah, we're over our hour. How long do you?
Probably just a couple minutes.
Okay. Yeah, if it's related to this, I have one more question about this too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, Justin, why scope instead of this?
Because this is your context.
And okay, and then scope is okay. So scope isn't your context. It's
scope is the collection of all of your scope. I mean, it's like your can view scope. It represents a collection of all of your contexts. It's like call objects in JavaScript, and all of your. It's like a closure in JavaScript. It represents that entity.
Okay. So
Cool.
I guess one more question on that. Is there a reason why we wouldn't have like this dot view, this dot scope, or this dot vars, this dot?
Yeah, I think you're. Yeah, the reason I think you have to understand how Stash works. And
Yeah,
if you,
sorry, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you do, then that it's like almost self-evident. But then you have to understand how Stash works. So there's like can view scope, right? Or scope, right? There's these scope objects, right? You might have seen those. I don't know. Like let's just say you have.
Yeah. Go on.
Like I can have a context, right? And let's just say like my context is me, right? And then I put that inside of a scope, right? And that will be my root scope. Now I can add something on top of the context, which would be I want to add like a new like we'll call that the parent. This was really a parent scope, and I can do root.add, and I can add a new context on top. Right. So contexts are like things that like you can look up the name property, but I could add like age. How old are you, Jason?
28.
Okay. Right. And then I can do another one. Grandparent scope equals parent scope add, and this would be like we'll just do this as Justin. This will be Jason. Then we'll do Kevin. What's distinguishing about Kevin? Beard. Right? So on grandparent scope, I can like read name, and that'll come out Justin. I can also read beard and age and things like that. And it'll come out true.
Because it'll walk up that scope.
Because it walks up the scope chain. Just like if you look up a variable in JavaScript, it walks up the contexts. It walks up the call objects to find a variable. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. So this is a scope object. Like these things actually exist. In some ways, the fact that you don't know this almost proves that we should do this, because the scope is something that's like not well understood in Stash. And it actually exists. There's can view scope, and there's methods on it and things on it, and they're good to learn about. And this would in some ways force people like, hey, there's this scope thing, and people would start conceptualizing it. So the scopes have like basically parent scopes, which have scopes have a context and a reference to the parent scope. So when you do name, you get Justin, or you can do, grandparent.get beard, which would be true. Now, if you do this on a scope, this is always a reference to the context. So this would return the Kevin object. So that's why it's not this, because if you do this dot name, it's going to give undefined.
Okay.
This is always a reference to the current context, right? And Stash has this, it has dot, it has dot slash, and it has dot slash, all which let you kind of play with which context in the scope that you want to reference.
Yeah, I think I understand.
Okay, so yeah, that's why you wouldn't do this, because it represents a context. You want something on the scope. You want to be like the vars, where vars might be stored in the scope. You want to go to that. Which in reality, every time you render a template, really the root scope, it's actually something more like this. The root scope is actually the special template scope, which might have vars now, and might have partials, and might have like all this other stuff. And then the actual data that someone passed to the template, that gets added. Like this might be what like you think really what people think is like the this is like the secret root. And then there's like what people think is their actual root, which would get secret. which would be Justin. If I render the template with Justin, there's actually this kind of underlying scope, and that's you know, I don't know. That's where the that's where like vars would be basically a special way to look it up. Partials would be a special way, and there'd be kind of some reserved words on the scope dot kind of syntax that would look in here automatically for things. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully the technology behind it totally makes sense. And then I can even put this in documentation, and people be like, "Oh, I totally get how stash works."
Thank you.
So my crazy thing. So when we were talking about this, here I'll share my screen. When we were talking about this morning, what this made me think is it would solve a lot of these problems if we made stash easier to debug by compiling it to JavaScript. So like how JSX compiles to hyperscript or whatever, if you had a template like this that compiled to something like this, so this is kind of what hyperscript looks like, where you have this H function that creates an element, takes some attributes, and then an array of its children. So in this case, like if I did this wrong and I did num equals num here, then the thing that it compiled to would basically be something like this, where var num is compiling to null because I didn't use the correct variable. And we could do the same thing with this scope that you're talking about.
Num equals num, which I don't think would actually cause a warning. If it was a different variable, it would when you were in strict mode.
Yeah, I see what you're. Well, it would actually compile to something like scope that. Well, I don't know what it would.
Maybe, yeah. So actually, we already have this. This is called mustache, can mustache.
What do you mean we already have this?
Well, can mustache compiles to JavaScript.
Right, but it doesn't do a lot of these things that stash does.
No, for sure, it does not.
So the other thing that I was going to say is this actually would get compiled.
Kevin, you muted yourself.
It is muting me anytime I type, which is annoying. So what I was saying is, like, it would actually render to a function that takes the scope and you'd actually see where it is looking up this people on the scope, and you could actually probably debug
this is exactly, I mean, this is what can, this is pretty similar to what can handlebars code or can mustache looks like. It doesn't. Yeah. It's not as hyperscripty, but it looks pretty similar.
Right, and I bet it was a lot easier to debug. Is my point.
Debug, yes, not author. And then, yeah, it was weird. Like part of it, it's much easier to not. It was much easier to write stash than mustache. Mustache was a huge pain to add features to.
Oh, I got you. Not author as add features to mustache.
Yeah, stash is far. I mean, as hard as it is for other people to understand stash, like the rate at which we've done things to stash, and it's just so much easier to get in there and make fixes. Handlebars was really. Or can mustache was really a mess. Like the code base was a big mess.
But is that because it's a compiler or because of the way that it was built?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't think that's like
there's just a lot of problems with it, and also, yeah, at this time, also the reason people complained a lot that kind of forced an eval on your code. We had to have eval inside CanJS.
Why?
Because let's say you wanted to load that and you didn't, because what you wrote kind of requires transpiling. Now, if you wanted to make CanJS work with just like from a script tag or something, and people have to, right now there's no eval inside CanJS because it just kind of like spits out functions. It has to spit out code that then gets eval, right?
Yeah.
So that was a problem that a lot of people were complaining about back then. And that's also what prompted the switch to can stash over the can mustache code base.
Okay.
Right, because it's an injection site possibly if you're not careful. Now it's not as big of a deal if you're using something like Steel and you're always going through like a transpiler.
Right.
It's basically written for a transpiler, so there's no eval in your like compiled code. It's that the eval is in Steel, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's not a crazy idea. We've already done it, and we've already got a code base that that by and large works that way. It's just the other reason what Stash, now this might be part of the reason too, is that Stash Mustache transpiled to essentially like what it made. I think it was also written kind of horrible because it wasn't transpiling to something like the JSXE byte code. It was more transpiling to like it would transpile to something like it was like can view hookup kind of stuff, and it would be like it would have your div and have all of this your input, and then there would be like a can view callback. Would have one, and then it was transpiling to something like this, and then there was like somehow callbacks or something function, and then there was the rest of your. It was kind of like it, but it was just really hard to. Because we weren't parsing HTML was part of it, we were just kind of simply looking for curly braces and replacing those with things. Like we would replace curly braces with this. Going to a transpiled form isn't, that's not a. I'll put it. It's not a bad idea. It's just you have to. You have to figure out what that looks like, and I don't know how much. Yeah, but I guess the good thing is it just gives you debugging entry points, but I still think it's going to be a lot of turtles underneath because you're still going to like you're still going to have an expression, and it's still going to have to go through our expressions probably, unless you're going to write out our expressions as well, which I think would be I don't know if that's a good idea, right? Because you wouldn't transpile. You'd have your function or whatever, and what you would transpile to wouldn't just be like that each function all splayed out like that, presumably, because you have to like look up the each helper and stuff like that. Instead, it's going to be like, I don't know, phrasing it. I mean, the only good thing is you've got a function which is you'd have your subrenderer, but really what you'd be probably compiling to is like returning something with like an each, not in each function, but it would have to be like it'd be like a make live binding branch renderer. Some kind of function like that, like branch renderer, and then it would have to like in some ways be given the new what is it, like not call expression but helper expression. We could presumably see that, and then we could do each, and then you would have your other arguments, which you'd have to probably in here you almost want to just do it as like each ABC kind of thing, right? It's not going to be, unless you're going to spit out a tremendous amount of code, like a huge amount of code, it's going to spit out something like this, which is still better. Just it's not. I don't think it's like To me, it's I'm more leaning towards a discussion of cost benefit, which you really, if you want to go down this road, the idea would be you'd have to kind of figure out what this transpile target looks like and what is the happy medium of transpile target that's like we're not having to totally rewrite stash. You know, there's probably like a sub, you know, something that we're reusing a lot of Stash's technology that we're just transpiling to that, and then what kind of benefit does it give in terms of debuggability? I think the big thing, what you just want to see here is like, you know, you see JSX stuff for your div in here, and then you can see the like, you know, new key lookup, and that is like, you know, that fits your scope and does ABC or something like that. And you can see that, and sure, you can debug that. But it's not going to be scope.get, probably.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a helper.
Hyperscript.
Huh?
Why is the target not hyperscript? The transpiling target can be hyperscript, like Kevin said.
Not if you want observability the same way that we support it. Well, we just changed like a single. It can't be exactly. We can't make it. If we're going to go hyperscript, then let's just go JSX and like let's not transpile stash to hyperscript. The hyperscript part isn't, to me, the hard part. It's the parsing and generation of the code that is probably the hard part. Like, it's easy enough for us to write. We have so many tools in our toolbox that, like, we don't get anything from generating hyperscript. If that makes sense. It might not make sense. Basically, like, we can make the hyperscript part. If I wanted to make a JSX, like a hyperscript implementation that just implements like create elements, stuff like that, that's really easy. Something like that already exists in Stash. It's called CanViewTarget. But I don't think that gets us where it doesn't get us like, and hyperscript is really only a one-way thing. It doesn't get us two-way bindings and things like that, which require, you know, something like this you can't do with hyperscript alone. You need it transpiled to more.
Cool.
Which I've been calling JS sexy. I'm gonna make it stick.
All right, Justin, you're gonna write up a proposal for this stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
And sorry, we're not gonna get to your second topic today.
Okay, then I'm just gonna say it works, and I'm gonna assume what's it called? You just assume everybody agrees with you, and you just do what you want. Right? What's that called?
Sorry, say that again.
What is it called? With unanimous. I'm just gonna assume. I'm gonna go with works, and I'm gonna assume unanimous consent.
That's not what that means.
Why does this need
What?
to...
That's what unanimous consent means.
Why do we have to choose this right now, today?
No, we don't. I'm just joking around. So
Okay.
that's what I'm gonna do.
Okay. Anything else before we go? Cool. Everyone who survived this live stream or is watching on YouTube afterwards, thanks for watching. And we'll see you guys next week. Have a good week.
Thanks.